This is the story of Linda and my trip to France, September of 2019. We went with Jim and Kathy Beckett. My niece and her husband Ade joined us from London for a couple of days as well. We landed in Paris and did the Paris thing for a couple of days. We hit wineries from Champagne, Chablis, and even as far down as Beaune. And there was never a shortage of fine food, from rillettes to pâtés, cheese, and other fine charcuterie. So after decompressing a couple of days in Paris, we grabbed the train from Paris down to Dijon. It was about an hour and a half trip. In Dijon, we rented a car and drove about an hour and 15-20 minutes north up to a little town called Vanvey. In Vanvey is where we set up shop for the next 10 days in La Villa 1892. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to Paris. We didn't waste much time getting on with the eating. We found a small little restaurant about a 15-20 minute walk from our hotel called La Maison Perret. Linda had stuffed cabbage. I had roasted vegetables on toast. There was plenty of cheese and bread and an AOC from Northern Rhone that we'll come back to many times. A great start to a great vacation. Now back to the hotel to crash. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, we jumped on the hop on and hop off bus. We went to Sacré-Cœur in Montmartre. We went looking for a lunch spot that we had stopped at on our last trip to Paris. But alas, the place had been turned into a gallery. We found La Poulebeau about 2 blocks off the hectic main square. This was named after Francisca Poulebeau, who was an illustrator and draftsman during the early to mid-1900s. This is a retake of a picture that was taken of Jim, same corner, back in 1999. After lunch, we did a little souvenir shopping, but Linda had to make one minor adjustment. After our train ride, we finally made it into Vanvey. Here are a few shots around the town. The city hall, inside the church, the World War I, World War II memorial at the end of town, the Promenade des Ramparts around the village for protection, and Kate and Ade in the backyard sunning themselves. After all, they are from England. Here are a few shots of inside Villa 1892. This, of course, is the kitchen. This is the living room. There were plenty of utensils, dishes, and glasses contained in that hutch for our use. Behind the seating area where I'm taking the picture is a huge dining room table that will seat at least 6. And the sitting room in between the entry hallway and the living room, there's a fireplace as well as in each bedroom. Our first excursion out was to the vineyard of Sylvain Bourlier. This is north of Vanvey, but south of the Champagne region. This is where they make a sparkling wine called Cremant, which is essentially champagne but cannot be called champagne because it's not in the Champagne region. On the way back to Villa 1892, we stopped by in a little town to buy some organic bread. We arrived about 10 minutes before they opened, and they opened maybe 10-15 minutes late, and what you see is what they had for sale. I'm sure it was gone in a matter of the first 30 minutes. The next day, we had lunch at a recommended place by our landlord, Nathalie, La Gare de Champrac, in a little town in the Champagne district called Guy-sur-Seine. The restaurant is inspired by the historical work of a rural guardian, Monsieur Droz. He is the last country guard in the area. The new guard is this restaurant, fed by its organic 1-hectare garden. The meals are prepared by the minute with the freshest ingredients. We were so impressed with the establishment and the owners that we actually ate here twice. What follows are shots of both meals that we had at this fabulous restaurant. The good news is that this 3-course meal is only 18 euros. Okay, 4 euros for the cheese, and whatever wine is extra as well. A nearby town, about 15-20 minutes by car, Châtillon-sur-Seine, had a local market on Saturday mornings. We ultimately took all of this food back to the villa, sat outside, had some champagne, barbecued the pork chops, and fixed one of our mini meals. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. We had a whole day's worth of activity, which of course included a huge lunch. After the market, we headed north about another 30 minutes or so to the Chateau Montigny-sur. This is a 12th century castle whose current owner bought it in 2002. She's a French-American. One of the noteworthy facts, that in 1918, while enrolled in the artillery school, Harry Truman spent several months at the castle. Once a year, the owner opens up the residence for a luncheon. In this particular case, they were getting ready for the opening of the Burgundy Champagne National Park. Quite a big deal for the area. The next morning, our tour guide / driver, Charlotte, picked us up quite early, and we headed up north to Chablis, where we went to the Sunday morning market, had lunch, and due to the inclement weather, we were unable to go to the vineyards, but we did have 2 tastings, one at a vineyard with a wine tasting facility in town and another at a wine store. After about an hour of strolling through the market, we headed down one of the side streets to a hotel where we had yet another fantastic multi-course lunch. Because we'd been eating so much, we decided just to have a snack for dinner. So much champagne, so little time. We also had a fire because of the inclement weather. The next day, Monday, we were on our own. We went up north to a larger town called Troyes, or to the French, Troyes. The town has been around since the Roman times and still contains many half-timber dwellings. We had a light lunch of crepes and a salad. We headed back to the villa because we had arranged for a private wine tasting starting at about 5:30. The sommelier doing the wine tasting was a woman by the name of Aurelia, and she was the sommelier at the Michelin 1-star restaurant that we had dinner at the Thursday before. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of the Thursday evening dinner. Just want you to know we worked hard at this wine tasting. We opted to have appetizers and not a full catered dinner. The next morning we woke up to a spectacular sunrise. It was such a nice day and we didn't have any real plans. We took a walk to the nearby village, the village of the Duke. That afternoon, we drove over to a walled city called Langres. This village is listed as one of the 50 most beautiful villages in France. Its historic significance is that in Roman times, it's the crossroads of 12 Roman roads. We made it back to the villa in time for Charlotte to pick us up for the ride down to Dijon, where we had dinner at the Michelin 2-star restaurant Chapeau Rouge, or Red Hat. Some more shots of the area around Vanvey. This cemetery was one we ran across that has what appears to be the remains of a flight crew consisting of Canadians and British that must have been shot down during the war. Through some of the literature at the villa, we discovered that there was a trout hatchery and fishery nearby. We headed over there to see what it was all about. Before long, we were buying dinner. The next morning, Charlotte picked us up to take us down to the vineyards in the Kate and Ade and the Burgundy region. After our first tasting, we went to what translates as Very Gerard's Castle for lunch.
She prefers wine more tannic.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. For the dessert, we see after if you want. Yeah. Okay. Alors, un bourgogne de dessert.
Linda and I went with a simple salad and a perfect egg, which is essentially a poached egg that was served on butternut squash. Jim and Kathy went for a 3-course offering, which included a larger salad. After lunch, we went to Domaine Orion for a tasting. This was one of the wines that we had during the private tasting at the villa the other night. After this tasting, we decided to drive down the road a little bit to Beaune and get some coffee and do a little sightseeing. After sightseeing, we loaded up and drove back to the villa. The next day we just messed around. Here would be our last meal that we had at the villa. The next morning we got up, headed for Dijon to the train station, where we had the opportunity to have our last cappuccino and croissant What would it be without French onion soup at the hotel that night? Our view from the hotel the night before we left, and finally back to the U.S. with nothing but memories.